my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part. I didn't do fucking shit.
In this episode, I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Starship Troopers. I watched this movie a lot when I was younger, as it combined giant bug hunting, military tropes, and a satirical approach to how humanity deals with anything unknown. Based on the 1959 short stories and later novel by the same name by Robert Heinlein, it follows similar characters, has similar commentary, and pretty much has the same ending. The movie, made in 1997, is set in the 23rd century. Earth is governed by the United Citizen Federation, which is essentially a military leader-based government instead of politicians and intellectuals. Citizens, as opposed to civilians, are granted the citizenship through military might and enlisting in the army. They are granted certain rights such as procreation and voting. Civilians, as you might imagine, are beneath citizens. This type of thinking and governance mirrors something in Sparta that was called agoge, which was the way boys and men were raised in Sparta to be strong and defend the state. Going back to Starship Troopers, Earth colonizes other planets, having learned interstellar travel on massive ships. In their travels, they come into contact with highly evolved species of creatures they call arachnids, or more derisively, bugs. They are the main enemy in this universe, and there is a constantly raging war to see who is going to control these planets. Johnny Rico, played by Casper Van Dien, is a teenager who wants to join the military ranks and become a citizen. He actually buys into some of the propaganda shown in this movie, like this.
Fully automatic burrito. Who wants to hold it?
Citizen rule. People making a better tomorrow.
He also wants to stay close to his girlfriend, Carmen Ibanez, played by Denise Richards. Rounding out their ranks is Carl Jenkins, played by Neil Patrick Harris. Carl Jenkins is a psychic. And finally, Isabel, or Dizzy, Flores, played by Dina Meyer. She's secretly in love with Rico and joins the infantry just to be closer to him. At one point in the movie, Carmen breaks things off with Rico because she's having feelings for someone named Xander Barkalow, who is another pilot. She goes on a speech about wanting to see the stars and wanting different things, but I think we all know what the real reason was for her breaking up with him. Having no outside distractions now, he actually impresses his drill sergeant, Zim. He's promoted to squad leader, but soon finds himself in a bit of hot water when a training exercise goes terribly wrong.
Just stay put. What's the problem?
Damn thing keeps getting in my way.
How come whenever something goes wrong, it's always you, Breckenridge?
It must be because I'm big and dumb.
Damn right!
Rico is subsequently demoted and flogged publicly, but he decides he wants to leave the military altogether. His parents at this time really were not in favor of him joining the military, so he calls them and tells them that he wants to come home. However, in the middle of their call, they get interrupted and the signal goes dark. He soon finds out that Buenos Aires has been destroyed, which was his home, and he decides to get back at the bugs by re-enlisting. He gets deployed to Clendathu, but due to some terrible miscalculations by military leaders, the soldiers are overrun. During the battle, Rico is seriously wounded and saved by Gene Razak, played by Michael Ironside. Rico is mistakenly reported for dead, and when Carmen hears about this, she's very sad. Poor Carmen. Rico is in a medical tube for about a week while the huge wound on his leg is being repaired, after which he, Dizzy, and Ace Levi, played by Jake Busey, join Gene Razak's ranks. They call themselves the Roughnecks. In the next battle, Rico defeats a tanker bug by throwing a grenade, splattering it across the landscape. He's then promoted to corporal for his bravery, and he and Dizzy become an item. Soon after, a distress signal is called from Planet P, and the Roughnecks are deployed to check it out. They find the outpost absolutely decimated. All the soldiers inside are killed, with the exception of one man. Upon inspection, a few of them even have huge holes in their heads, and their brains are missing. Ew. It turns out to be an ambush, and soon thousands of bugs are descending upon the outpost. As luck would have it, Xander and Carmen are actually deployed to save the Roughnecks. Soon after, Dizzy is impaled by one of the bugs and dies in Rico's arms. When they make it safely back to the main ship, they find that their good friend Carl is now a lieutenant, and a cold one at that. He reveals that the mission to Planet P was actually purposeful to discover what they call a brain bug controlling the rest. He rationalizes it as a necessary sacrifice in order to do the greater good. He wants the Roughnecks to be redeployed to find this brain bug. Rico is now promoted again and leads the Roughnecks back to Planet P, where his girlfriend just died. Not uncomfortable at all. At the beginning of the battle, artillery bugs would shoot giant rocks out of their, well, rear ends, shoot Carmen's ship down. She and Xander abandon ship in a smaller pod that crashes through a soft spot in the earth, landing into an underground cave. This cave, much to their dismay, is the home of the brain bug and several hundred other bugs. Xander and Carmen are captured, and the brain bug devours Xander's brain in gruesome fashion. Meanwhile, Rico, Levy, and another teammate, Watkins, go to investigate Carmen's distress signal. They make it to the underground cavern, where Rico is holding a mini-nuke out to the brain bug. He believes that the brain bug knows exactly what it is, and he turns out to be correct. After the brain bug leaves, the rest of the bugs attack. Watkins, unfortunately, is mortally wounded and sacrifices himself to keep the other bugs at bay. Rico, Carmen, and Levy get to the surface. They find that the brain bug is being dragged out of a cave by ropes. Jenkins, being the psychic, goes over to the brain bug and holds his hand to it. He discovers that the brain bug is afraid, and when he announces this, the soldiers rejoice. Finally, a propaganda clip is played to show that the brain bug is being tortured.
Mysteries will the brain bug reveal? Federal scientists are working around the clock to probe its secrets. Once we understand the bug, we will defeat it.
I mean, hey, we have to ensure humanity wins, right? Rico is seen heading into another battle as the leader of the Roughnecks, while Carmen is the leader of one of her own massive ships. Now, this movie isn't really for the faint of heart, with the amount of gore and violence within it. You have to have a decent stomach to constantly watch blood and guts flying all over the place. There are a couple of scenes where the bugs just tear human beings apart, literally limb from limb. The gore and violence is also in stark contrast to the clips and propaganda videos of kids stomping on hundreds of little cockroaches while they are doing their part. The clips and advertisements not only really make me laugh because of how absurd and satirical they are, but they also do serve as a reminder of how people's thinking can be adjusted by a combination of half-truths and manipulative visuals. The bugs do attack Earth, so they're not so innocent. However, the propaganda really serves as a necessary part of the eradication process to make humanity look like they're doing what they have to and not what they want to. I mean, who's going to admit that they took over someone else's home and that they're actually the bad guys? Now, as far as the genre goes, or the subgenre in this case, this is military sci-fi. One of the things I love about military sci-fi is a level of satire, whether it be satirizing how gung-ho soldiers are to go into the fray, satirizing the military's purpose in a given plot, or satirizing who the good and bad guys are in that story. Now, I kind of covered this in my Fallout 3 video. If you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out on my channel. But I feel like sometimes there really is no true good guy or bad guy in sci-fi. Both sides want to live, the other side wants to kill them, and there are almost always innocent casualties involved. Where I think this deviates from military sci-fi in a movie like, say, Aliens 2, coming soon, I think in this case, Earth's government is openly conquering other planets without any regard for the life forms that live on them. The bugs are just seen as an obstacle and just a villain that must be destroyed, which now brings me to my writing focus for today. Today I'm talking about villains in stories. Now, villains are obviously a very important part of both sci-fi and fantasy, as well as many other genres. There must be an opposing force or obstacle to the good guys, or else it's just a one-sided affair, and honestly very boring. However, something I noticed early on in my writing, and something that I had to really correct, was that villains need at least some level of thought put into their backstory to give them some motivation and purpose beyond just villainy for villainy sake. Now, I'm going to take an example from my book in the series, A Spark in the Ashes. I recommend you check that out whenever you get a minute. And one of the main villains in my novel series is Mrs. White. She's the leader of the Annexers Alliance and is working for some mysterious boss who comes about in the second novel. Admittedly, in the first novel and even in the second novel, I have to say I didn't really give her as much complexity outwardly as I could have. Now, she has a story underneath that I'm going to unravel in the third novel, but I also felt that if you give too much to the reader for a villain's backstory, you might end up making the villain more sympathetic than you intended. She's really there to present danger directly to the hub. In the second novel, she's actually playing a bigger part, and you will see more of the story unraveling as far as who she's working for and some of the reason why. So my advice in this case is don't make the reader want to root for the villain, because then your whole story is going to fall apart. On the other hand, in thinking about this movie as I'm writing this episode, I also started to think about how I write my heroes. The United Citizen Federation in the movie is leading by military might and propaganda in order to get its message across. But it's also social commentary on manifest destiny and the reality of war when you see what really is taking place on the battlefield. Within that framework, you have several characters that are drawn into that propaganda and have that desire for greatness that they don't really understand until they're actually seeing what happens. They have flaws and make bad decisions, just as any other people would. I intentionally write my good characters with what I call grays, which are, flaws and moral leanings that maybe don't always have you agree with them, and every decision that they make isn't going to be the right one. By making bad decisions alongside good ones, and sometimes making bad decisions despite the information that's in front of them, I feel like we can all relate to a character like that. We've all made decisions that ended up being the bad one, even though we had the most information available. And there are times where we've made really impulsive decisions and we should have really thought things out better. I try to incorporate that in my story so that you do feel a little bit more akin to the character. Now, I'm going to close today by giving one more example, talking about Dr. Wong once more. Now, if you don't know who Dr. Wong is, I talked about her in my first episode, Time Enough at Last, which is also on my channel. Give it a listen. Dr. Wong is a character that I wrote intentionally to be complex and to be someone where you can argue about where she lost her way. Funnily enough, my editor, who is Louise Hare on Fabled Planet, if you're a sci-fi writer or a fantasy writer, I recommend checking out their website because they've really helped me along in this process. She pointed out that I made Dr. Wong too sympathetic in that everyone is trying to come after her and she's just doing her best to keep the people safe. I really needed to incorporate a little bit more of an unraveling in her mind or an unraveling in her morals in order to show that she is really falling apart in certain ways and maybe having that question about whether she should continue down the path she is. So it was an unfortunate reality, and the fact is that one of your edits is going to be a substantial developmental edit. You're going to be rewriting characters sometimes. You're going to be adding in chapters or taking away chapters. You're going to be doing a lot of work in one of your edits. That is going to take you most of the time. It's going, in my opinion, to take you almost as much time to do this major substantial edit as it did to write the first draft. There's one section in the story, which is towards the end of the novel, where Dr. Wong is holding a voting session among all 250 citizens inside the hub. They end up voting 3 different ways. There are 3 people that are being judged based on the level of their crimes. And the citizenry's task is voting as to whether they are guilty, number 1, and number 2, what their punishment should be within their society. Should they pay a serious debt? Should they pay in jail time? Should they work it off? Or should they be exiled? The problem comes along when Dr. Wong realizes that the citizenry does not agree with her own personal opinion about a 4th person who has been captured and is about to be sentenced. She decides on her own that it is her turn to make a unilateral decision on behalf of the citizenry, even when they clearly didn't vote that way. I intentionally put this issue in the book specifically because I wanted to show how fascistic she is becoming. So, did you like Starship Troopers? What do you think of its commentary on the military or manifest destiny? And while you're at it, check out my novel series, A Spark in the Ashes, in all major and minor outlets. Book 2 is out December 1st. You can pre-order your copy now. At the end of the day, I don't know about you, but I agree with this guy.
The only good bug is a dead bug.